Hi, I'm Phil Harball and this is my 87th video discussing British science fiction. In earlier videos I've detailed the story of how Skyon's managing director travelled to John Russell Fearn's Blackpool home and talked him into signing a 5-year contract to write science fiction novels exclusively for Skyon under the contractual pen name of Volgo Staton. The only exception was that Fearn was allowed to continue to write for his lucrative main overseas market, the Toronto Star Weekly. Since their novels were published as a tabloid newspaper, insert in the Canadian Star Weekly magazine, they were not one of Skyon's paperback competitors. This was Fearn's most lucrative overseas market. So there's dozens of novels. Now, following Annihilation in May 1950, a steady stream of Staton novels followed each month until the autumn of 1952, when Skyon were hit with a crippling fine for obscenity in one of their gangster titles. For a time, Skyon Limited were financially very rocky indeed and looked like going under. Author payments were suspended, and Fearn found himself owed for 6 novels to the tune of over £300, worth tens of thousands today. He promptly terminated his contract and sued Skyon for his unpaid fees. Skyon's editor, Maurice Reid, was desperate to continue their successful science fiction line, their biggest seller. He was extremely fortunate to be offered novels by a rising star writer, E.C. Tubb, who was unaware of Fearn's departure. Skyon rushed Tubb's novels into print as a replacement for Fearn. Reid inventing a new house name, Volstead Gridban. But despite the success of the Gridban novels, the founder of Skyon Limited, B.Z. Emanuel, lost control of the company. He left and formed his own new company, Gannett Press. Skyon Limited passed on to director Lou Benjamin, who continued the company out of their warehouse at Avonmore Road in London. Meanwhile, once it became known that Fearn was now free of his Skyon contract, he was inundated with SF commissions for other publishers. As I've reported in earlier videos, he quickly sold 4 novels to Pearsons and Curtis Warren and began writing a new novel, Moons for Sale, intended as the first of a series for Hamilton's. Skyon's editor Maurice Reid had resigned and now headed a consortium of disaffected Skyon gangster authors who formed another new company, Milestone Publications. Reid moved quickly, seeking to poach both Skyon star SF authors, Fearn and Tubb, and intended to publish them as Volgo Staton and Volstead Gridban. Milestone also poached Skyon artist Ron Turner for their own cover artwork. Now, Fearn had recently sold a science fiction novel, Deadline, to the Toronto Star Weekly, and he decided that this would be ideal for his first Volgo Staton novel for Milestone. But before the novel would be suitable for Milestone, it needed to be considerably abridged. Fearn did this himself by retyping the novel to a shorter length. He also gave it a new title for its first book edition, Fugitive of Time. Ron Turner was commissioned to paint an illustrative cover. But before the book was published, Lou Benjamin made his move. With his new financial backing, Skyon set about reclaiming their best authors. Second. Fern was quickly paid the outstanding £300 he was owed and offered pay in advance, which was unheard of in those times, to now write 2 science fiction books a month. His contract, only 2 of the 5 years stipulated had passed, was rewritten to allow Fern more freedom with his writing. His exclusivity to Skyen was to be limited to science fiction, leaving him free to write in other genres for other publishers. But a condition of the new deal was that Fern had to withdraw his Milestone and Hamilton novels and pass them on to Skyen. In retrospect, Fern might have been better off freelancing, but given the chaotic publishing climate of the time, he could scarcely be blamed for selling out. Skyen then set about stopping Milestone from using the Vorgostatten and Volstead Gridband bylines as house names, and succeeded, but only after 2 Gridband novels by Tub had slipped through: Planetoid Disposals Limited and Fugitive of Time. Now this book was not the Fern Fugitive of Time. That later appeared from Skyen as 0 Hour by Statten. Milestone had already purchased a hand-lettered illustrative cover by Ron Turner, so they slapped it onto a new Tub novel. You see there, for which it was totally inappropriate as regards both title and cover picture. In to complete the complex tale, Ron Turner also did the cover, we see there, for 0 Hour published by Skyen. Same scene but a different cover. Skyen gave Fern a now exclusive Gridband byline as well, the idea being that he would be writing full-time under both names for Skyen and would be unable to capitalise on his new contract clause to write non-science fiction for other companies. Thus, Moons for Sale became the first Gridband story for Skyen. It was published in May of 1953. Meanwhile, Deadline had been published in the Star Weekly for December the 13th, 1952, and is undoubtedly one of Fern's best stories, working brilliantly as a science fiction story and as a mystery suspense novel. Gordon Fryer is a man who discovers the exact future moment when he's due to die by accident at a relatively young age, and he so sets out to change his future history. The scientific process that reveals his demise also provides a series of dated photographs of him at future intervals, but despite Fryer's best efforts to change things, each of the photographs becomes a true record, and suspense builds as a deadline of the final paragraph comes ever nearer. The 1953 Vorgostatten version of the story was translated, first in France in 1955, and then the following year in Italy by Patrizio Deloro from the French. Deloro was the pseudonym of magazine editor Giorgio Monicelli and his partner. Interestingly, the Italian publisher Mondadori did not issue it as a science fiction novel in the magazine Il Romanzi di Urania, as they had with earlier Statten novels. Instead, they put it out in their prestigious modern novel series, Biblioteca Moderna Mondadori, described by the publisher as a collection that brought together outstanding political, social and moral texts by Italian and foreign writers. Now, in that same ambitious series, you see on the inside back cover there, in addition to Fern's 0 Hour, a few other science fiction novels of high literary merit by such authors as James Hilton, John Tien, Wilson Tucker, Isaac Asimov, Louis Paget, Edgar Pangborn and Arthur C. Clarke, all today considered classics of literary science fiction. The Italians recognise 0 Hour as a true science fiction classic. hence the title of my video. In the 1970s and 1980s, the novel would also be republished in France by Reddit as a graphic novel, as were many others of his Sky novels translated in the French Anticipation series of novels. So highly did the comic strip publishers rate this story that instead of abridging it into one volume, they published it in 2 installments. They announced that it was continued in the 2nd installment, which we see there. So the novel was completely unabridged. Classical stuff. A few years later, it was issued in a single double novel volume. There's the 2 installments joined together. And a few years later, it was reissued in that double volume. The quality of the novel was further attested when I sold it to F.A. Thorpe in England, who published it under Fern's original title of Deadline in the Linford Mystery series in 2006. Now, when I retyped the novel for submission to Thorpe, I noticed for the first time that there were considerable differences in the text between the Star Weekly and the Sky and paperback versions. A careful study of them, together with Fern's original correspondence, revealed something very interesting. Fern had first written the novel to the Star's preferred length of 45,000 words, which their editors then skillfully condensed to 40,000 words to fit their standard format. But in the meantime, Fern himself had rewritten and condensed his manuscript even further to only 36,000 words for its UK book publication. Here and there, Fern had deleted different passages so that each version contained text that was missing from the other. In my own retyping from the longer Star version, I carefully restored any additional text that was in 0 hour. My final manuscript came out at almost 44,000 words, almost completely restored to its original form, and consequently read even better than any previously published version. I always considered it a pity that this novel was fated never to be published with its original Ron Turner cover and title, Fugitive Time. Many years ago, I even had commissioned Ron Turner to recreate his cover painting to have it ready for just this purpose. Then, in 2012, with Borgo Books publishing many of the best of Fern's novels in the USA for the first time, the opportunity finally came to do just that. And we see that splendid Borgo edition there. But a restored version of the novel has never appeared in translation, despite having been optioned over the years by both French and Italian publishers, who all inexplicably failed to publish it. Now that is until Profondo Rosso came into the picture. Thanks to the perspicacity of Luigi Cosi, we now have this gorgeous new Italian paperback edition. With a beautiful new cover by Romano Nuzzo and a new interior illustration by Roberta Gordischioni. That's a new interior illustration. Let me get to it. There we are. Specially commissioned for this new edition. Now the book has an afterword by me. It's an afterword by me, and it also shows the earlier covers. See, American cover, English cover, that's the deadline, which I mentioned earlier, published by Linford. And on the back there we see the original Italian cover, French, and the American cover. And also we see here an announcement that the next Vargo Statten novel to be published by this publisher will be Born of Luna. And there we see it's Italian 1950s edition. That'll be forthcoming. It's likely to be preceded by another E.C. Tubb classic reprint. And speaking of Tubb, his fans should note that his 1953 grid band title, A Fugitive Time, it's now currently in print under his own name with the more appropriate title of Quest for Power from his current US publisher Wildside Press. More fine editions to look forward to.